Good evening. Hey, I'm Sharona. You are watching The Extra Point. We come to you live every Friday night at 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Google Hangout now. We may be moving back to a different format. We'll just have to see. Google's been very kind to us, but we may actually go to a Spreaker-based format, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, we're going to be staying right here on Google Hangout. You can also watch us. Some of you are watching us on YouTube, so welcome. I'm joined by Scott Carasik, who is a Falcon. He's a great football mind. I'm going to let him tell you where to follow him. Great Twitter follow. He writes about the Falcons. And so without further ado, I'm always happy to have Scott on. I'm going to bring him on and let him introduce himself and tell you guys where you can find him.
Yeah, you can find me at Scott Carasik on Twitter, or you can find I run Draft Falcons. I also write for Bleacher Report on the Atlanta Falcons, NFL Draft, NFL, a little bit of college football here and there. So, busy guy.
Yes, yes, you very much are. Always talking about something football, generally football related on Twitter. Let's go ahead and get started. Scott was kind enough to join me on my pre-draft show talking about the NFC South and what we expected might happen. Scott, we haven't had a chance to talk since the draft. Were there any big surprises for you, not just with the Falcons, but with all of the NFC South teams in general?
I guess for me, the biggest surprise was Brandon Cooks to the I'd say Brandon Cooks to the Saints was the biggest surprise out of all of them. It didn't make a lot of sense at the time, but going back and looking at it now, it makes a ton of sense. So I can understand why they did that. I don't think he's a huge impact player early on, but I do think he will be a solid player for sure.
I was reading the NFC South guys did they do all the divisions do like these little roundup things, and they were talking about the additioned player who might make the biggest impact in the NFC South. A lot of love for Jake Matthews as a kind of an underrated guy who might make an impact, but Brandon Cooks was definitely mentioned, and a guy that of course, Scott knows this, that I have mad love for. I was a big fangirl of Mike Evans, and actually on that show predicted that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would draft him, and they did. So he was mentioned as well. Did you happen to catch that on the ESPN blog, Scott?
Yeah, I saw that, and I think Mike Evans will have a big impact, but I don't think he's going to have as big of an impact as Jake Matthews will.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. But Jake Matthews won't be a guy who'll be in the running, unfortunately, because offensive linemen don't get that love for like Rookie of the Year.
And they never will, which is unfortunate because they're the backbones of teams, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
Did you think, kind of an off-the-cuff question, but did you think that Larry Warford deserved to be in that mention last year?
I don't, just because I didn't think that he made that big of an impact for the Lions. Their offense was going to be good no matter what. I think the big reason why Atlanta's offense took a step back was because they didn't have a good offensive line.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do absolutely agree with that. All right, so we've already broken the ice. Jake Matthews, the first selection by the Atlanta Falcons in the NFL draft. Give us your thoughts on that pick.
It was the right pick. I said if they weren't going to trade up, then taking the 15-year starter to protect Matt Ryan isn't going to be the bad move. It'd be the perfect move. So take Jake Matthews, have your franchise guy protect your other franchise guy, and maybe he starts out at right tackle this year, but after this year you can cut Sam Baker, save a lot of money. So there's a lot of ways to do it.
Yeah, were you at all surprised about how the draft went down in the picks before the Falcons made their selection?
The only real surprise that I saw was Blake Bortles going third overall to the Jags. I had a feeling Watkins was going to go top 5, and it was really just we just need one quarterback to magically go in the top 5, and Atlanta's going to have their pick of whoever's left of the top 4 players in the draft, which was Matthews, Mack, Robinson, and then obviously Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah,
So,
I completely agree with that. That was a big surprise for me as well. Do you think though that it threw a kink in things? Was it a big enough surprise that it affected what teams did from then on out?
well, I think Atlanta was originally going to go with Taylor Lewan because they didn't think that Jake Matthews was going to be there. So they wanted to trade up with Jacksonville to 3 to go get Jake Matthews, and then he fell to 6, and they were like, all right, we get to keep our 3rd-round pick. So it did change the plan a little bit, but it changed it for good because now you got a high 3rd-round pick to add to the team. So.
Yeah. There's been some talk about whether or not the Titans. The reason why I asked that question, I was, sort of curious your thoughts. There's been a lot of talk about the Titans being a little bit surprised about how the draft selections went between picks 1 and 9. I did not think that was a big enough surprise, or really any of the. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney at number 1, that was not a surprise. Greg Robinson, number 2, to the St. Louis Rams. You cannot consider that to be that big of a surprise. So the Blake Bortles thing, it definitely, I was like, wow, that I would never. Even though they do need a quarterback, I did not think that they would jump at that spot to do it. So yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise, but in a larger sense, it definitely made sense. So the Falcons went offense with the first pick. They opted to go defense with the second. What did you think about that?
I wasn't expecting Rashid Hageman there. I was honestly expecting either Jeremiah Tauchu or Jason Morrow. They brought in Jason Morrow 3 times. They went out to Texas to visit him at Texas Tech. They brought him in for a visit. It looked like the perfect fit to take over for Tony Gonzalez because pretty much the same kind of guy. And then curveball, Rashid Hageman's available.
Yeah.
I don't think they saw themselves with Rashid Hageman sitting right there in their laps.
Yeah.
So they said, you know what, we really liked Rashid Hageman. We really liked him at the Senior Bowl. We got to coach him firsthand. We didn't have to bring him in for any visits except for maybe a 10-minute one for physicals and stuff. And they really like Rashid Hageman. They want him to play defensive end. They've got the guys in front of him to where they can teach him instead of throw him to the wolves right away. Because technically he's not a very good player. Like, his technique is not very great.
He needs some work.
He's a powerful guy, and he's got potential at the wazoo. He could be the next Richard Seymour if he puts it all together. So, I mean, if you've got a guy who could be the next Richard Seymour and you just got to bring him up, let him sit behind Jonathan Babineau. Let him sit behind Corey Peters. Let him sit behind, Paul Soliai and Tyson Jackson and Malachi Goodman even for at least this year, and just let him learn the game and learn what he's supposed to do. He's a raw lump of clay who's got some of the best teachers right now for him. I really, honestly, I love the pick. I just wasn't expecting him to go there. And I thought they were probably going to go with an edge rusher too because they did like Jeremiah Tauchu. But Tauchu went a little bit earlier because I think he was going to be the 3rd-round pick had he been available instead of Southwood.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise to me that that he fell. I think that he'll obviously be a good guy for them to develop. Do you think though that he'll fit in to the rotation early on, or will a lot of that depend on how well he does in training camp? And give us an update on what you're hearing out of OTAs.
Well, OTAs and minicamps, he was playing with the 3rd team because he's still learning technique.
Right.
But that's okay. The guy who was playing with the 2nd team in front of him was Pere Jerry. I don't see any way Pere Jerry makes the roster unless Corey Peters is injured. It's the only way I think he makes the roster. I don't think that Hageman's going to have that huge of a learning curve from Mike Smith's defense. Or not Mike Smith. Yeah, Mike Smith. Mike Smith and Mike Nolan's defense just because it's the right fit for him. And Atlanta likes to run a lot of 2 and 3 defensive lineman sets with the big defensive tackles. I think ideally, though, he does see a lot of time in the nickel rotation.
I was going to ask you, what do you see him? He's a guy who was kind of projected to do a lot of different things. Where do you see him fitting in terms of the Falcons' defensive line?
He can play in the 5 tech. He can play in the 3 tech. He can play the 1. He can pretty much play anything from 1 to 6 effectively. I think long term they want to see him as a 5 or even a 4 technique defensive end. I think when it comes down to it in the short term, though, a lot of 3 technique nickel when they go with the 2 4 or 5 alignments, and they basically have Babineau and him as 3 techniques. They've got Massaquoi and Bierman on the outside. And then they got Warlow and Bartu in the middle of that with their 5th defensive end. Basically just pulling Soliai out and having a pair of 3 techs in there to attack. I think that's going to be the goal there.
All right. So the next draft pick, tell us. I was trying to find my list, and I seem to have misplaced it. I had a list all handy and available. What was the next draft pick? Did they have a 3rd round?
It was Desmond Southward, the safety from Wisconsin. Very good player in terms of athleticism and projection, but right now just really, really raw. Just absolutely not ready. I like him. I think he's going to be. You sit him behind Dwight Lowery for a minute. You sit him behind maybe even Kamal Ishmael for a minute, and just let him go out there and learn the game. He's not ready yet, but he's got a lot of potential, especially athletically. Solid player, though. I don't think he's going to start this year. And I think if he starts this year, it's going to be because he somehow magically learned how to play safety in the NFL.
All right, so that is the 3rd round pick, and thank you very much for helping me out here. Let me get us going down through the list. Hello, Atlanta Falcons. Oh, yes. Was the running back next, Devonta Freeman, the guy everybody's talking about?
Yes, Devonta Freeman. A lot of fans like him. I like him. They lost Jason Snelling this year. They needed to. They really needed to replace Snelling with someone who could give them an explosive element, but still have the same kind of blocking, catching, rushing abilities. Freeman easily has all that. He's a guy who could start this year if they really needed him to. So say Steven Jackson goes down again. Freeman's going to end up starting, playing the primary role. He'd block. He'd do a lot of screens. He'd get maybe 200 carries. If Jackson goes down the first game, Freeman will see 200 carries as the primary back. They don't want Jacquizz Rodgers to be the starter. That was why they drafted Freeman.
I was going to ask you about that. There was an article on ESPN about Rodgers and about what role he was going to play.
He's always played.
Yeah, the Freeman pick is interesting in that sense because Steven Jackson goes down last year, and there really wasn't anybody there to pick up the slack. There was nobody there to come back in and to Freeman sort of tried, but he wasn't a guy that that could come in. The Falcons' running game really struggled when Steven Jackson wasn't in. Jackson's in the second year of a 3-year deal. And I was looking at your undrafted free agent list. You had the running back from Syracuse, I believe, as the guy that might actually end up making the roster. I've got that pulled up. Jerome Smith is a guy that you're kind of high on.
I do like Jerome Smith. He's a very, very good player. He reminds me a lot of Jason Snelling, and that's why I like him.
Yeah.
Because Snelling was one of those all-around contributors that really just busted his ass every chance he could get.
Do you think that Steven Jackson's going to make about $3 million this year? It jumps to like 3.75 next year, and obviously a lot of it's going to depend on his effectiveness, what kind of productivity he's able to bring. When he came back from his injury, he really sort of came on and finished strong. But do you think that they're hedging their bets there in terms of what Steven Jackson might be able to do?
Oh, easily. The big thing that they're trying to do is make sure that they've got a backup plan. They've got a parachute in case they fall out of the plane. That's honestly the biggest thing I can say. Because when you've got that parachute, you're okay. When you've got that safety net, if you will, that's what Devontae Freeman's supposed to be. He's supposed to be that safety net that can still come in, still give you a competent, and still make it to where Jacquizz Rodgers gets his. Rodgers isn't going to lose any carries. He's not going to lose any touches this year. He's still going to see, about 100 carries, about 50 catches, because that's what he gets. That's his role. He's just going to have it more spread out, so he's more of a change of pace guy, so his averages are going to be a little higher. He's not a guy who's supposed to see the ball 20 times a game.
Yeah, he's really more that guy that plays the – he's not a Danny Woodhead guy by any means. He's a little bit smaller and stuff, but he's that guy that is going to be the one you can line up in a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah. You line them up a lot of different ways. You put them out at slot receiver. You put them out wide. You put them in the backfield. You give them, 8 to 10 carries. You give them 2 to 3 catches a game, and you just let him do his thing. There's no reason to make him anything more than what he is. He's a change of pace back who needs to be used as a change of pace. Using him as anything more than that, you're asking too much.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You already talked about this in some of the articles that you've written, and it's definitely true. It's a crowded backfield for the Falcons. If this undrafted free agent does shine as you think that he might, and the Falcons don't want to risk putting him on the practice squad, I don't know whether there might be interest from other teams or what have you, but let's just say hypothetically that the Falcons don't want to risk losing him. They want to put him on the active. Who would you see being the odd man out here?
Josh Vaughn, and I think they'd carry 5 running backs.
Okay.
As opposed to carrying, 6 wide receivers, like what it looks like the plan right now. I think they'd only carry 5 receivers and 5 running backs instead. Because they can use a guy like Steven Jackson, split him out wide. They can use a guy like Jacquizz Rodgers, split him out wide. They can use a guy like Devontae Freeman, split him out wide. They can use Anton Smith and split him out wide and not feel like they're losing anything because they're all matchup problems there for a defense.
I was wondering if you thought Smith might be a bubble guy. He got some opportunities last year. He's kind of a guy that has been a special teams kind of guy. Do you think that they see him as a guy who can step in and help in the offense when needed?
He's one of those underrated gunner types. I don't think they really want to give him more than maybe a touch or 2 every game this year. So he'll get like 20 carries on the season or like 20 touches on the season. And he'll probably end up with like 300 yards on those 20 touches because whenever he touches it, for whatever reason, it's magical. But he's got an impact. The thing that keeps him on the roster is him being a gunner. He's
Okay.
arguably one of the best gunners in the league. And that's the real value of Anton Smith, is he's a gunner. He's a great gunner. Drew Davis is a great gunner. Those guys are going to have roster spots just from being gunners. So they've got to show something on offense. Davis gives you a couple catches. Anton Smith gives you a couple carries that are like, man, well, at least he's given us something. He's not Allen Rossum, who can't provide anything at the position. He's at least given us, a competent wide receiver who can go out there as the fifth guy.
What if Jerome Smith comes in, gets an opportunity in training camp and during the preseason to play special teams and turns out to be an awesome gunner himself? What do you think? Do you still think they keep both?
He'd have to look just as good as Anton Smith as a gunner and way better as a running back for them to make that call. He would just have to look better all around. That's why I think Bernard Reedy could take the spot over Darius Johnson this year, because he looks better all around for that sixth spot. But the dark horse there is Geraldo Boldevine, who you can't really compare him to Darius Johnson or Reedy because he's a bigger 6'4", 220-pound guy who plays like Brian Finneran did late in his career, where he's basically a tight end playing wide receiver with great hands, makes any catch. Matt Ryan was intentionally throwing bad passes to him. He was like, hey, I'm going to throw it a little high. And he made him extend for it in minicamp. And the guy caught it, like fingertip, one-handed, caught it, pulled it in. So I think with a guy like that, I think he's got a better shot at making the roster than either Reedy or Darius Johnson if they keep a sixth wide receiver. That sixth wide receiver is going to have to be a special teams ace and provide something that they feel they can win with.
See, I love this. The back end of the roster, I think, often goes ignored, and I love that you're able to talk about it so well, and you know these guys so well, and that was really great stuff. The next pick was a little bit of a controversial pick. Some people were a little bit surprised to see the Falcons do that. And obviously I'm talking about, I may mispronounce his name. I'm terrible on names. Everybody knows this. Prince Shimbo. Did I do that right?
Pronounced it perfectly.
All right, great. Linebacker from Notre Dame. We won't go into his issues, but he had some off-the-field issues. Were you surprised at all that the Falcons took a chance on him?
My view on those issues is that if the Falcons really felt like they were going to be legitimate issues for them, or like there was backing to them, because I realize that there's a lot of publicity about them, but sometimes things go public without a lot of backing. I feel like if the Falcons were scared about it, they wouldn't have brought him in at all. They would have said, this guy can go play for someone else. He's not that good to where he's a must-have on a roster with that kind of issue. Otherwise, he would have gone in the first round.
I think it's also a little bit easier for a coaching staff like Mike Smith's, a well-established coach, has won in the league and is pretty well established with the Atlanta Falcons. It's easier for a guy like that to take this chance and say, we've investigated this, we're going to give this kid a shot. Do you think that he has a legitimate chance of making the roster?
Oh, he's making the roster. I'm not worried about that. The thing with Prince Shembo, though, what I'm saying is if there was any backing to it or if they felt like it was legitimate, they wouldn't have brought him in, because they've got former FBI guys doing background checks on these people. They don't have like what we have as fans and writers and press. They don't have that kind of access. Like they don't have the limited access we have. They've got way more access than we've got. Their access makes our access look like we're just chilling here watching TV. I mean, they've got some of the best people out there doing investigations.
So where do you see Shimbo fitting in?
He's going to be a backup inside linebacker, I think, early, but he could very easily take over the weak inside linebacker spot over Joplo Bartu, that's the Sean Weatherspoon spot. Weatherspoon got injured. It was going to be Weatherspoon and Warlow. You were going to have Shembo behind Warlow, and you were going to have, or not Shembo, you were going to have Shembo behind Weatherspoon. You were going to have Dent and Smallwood behind Warlow. Now that's changed a little bit because Weatherspoon got injured. They traded away Dent. They brought in Tim Dobbins. I don't think Tim Dobbins really has a fit in the defense. I think if he's playing in the defense, it's going to be last resort. Warlow's out, Bartu's out, Shembo's out. You're playing Smallwood and Dobbins just to have a veteran out there, basically.
A little bit of an aside, but you brought the name up. I'm curious your thoughts on this. I don't necessarily endorse this, but I want to ask you the question. Some people have labeled it's the second year in a row that Sean Weatherspoon has been injured. Is it fair to label him with the injury-prone label?
Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, I think at this point Weatherspoon is... I'll put it this way. I'll be surprised if he stays in Atlanta without taking a huge pay cut.
Okay. What is the status of his contract?
He's in the final year of his deal.
Okay.
Which is why I'll be surprised if he stays in Atlanta without a pay cut. Because he is just... He's not...
He can't make the tub in the club.
Exactly. He's played 6 games in 2 years. You know, at this point, it's almost like I've played more than him.
Yeah.
And it sucks because I like Sean Weatherspoon as a player, and he's a leader outside. Like, he's a leader off the field. He's a leader in the locker room. It might get to a point where what he's got to do is sit with the coaching staff and become a coach. You know, he may not be strong enough. He may not have strong enough leg muscles to play in the NFL. You know,
it is kind of curious that that this has happened once again. I definitely agree with that. The next pick was another defensive back, Ricardo Allen from Purdue. What are your thoughts on that pick?
He's solid. I think the Allen pick was more for a depth type deal. He's a great special teams player. So as you can see, that kind of is a bit of a running theme. Falcons love their special teams players, and the big thing with Ricardo Allen, though, is he was very similar in build and style to what Brent Grimes was coming out of college. And I think that's kind of where they're thinking. You know, hey, best case, this guy can be Brent Grimes. You know, if there's injuries and he ends up being Brent Grimes, we're golden. Worst case, he could be Kevin Mathis and be a career nickel who comes up with that interception in that clutch moment that no one's expecting, but, you know, he can be that guy. So, I mean, he's got a lot of potential. The only question is whether he fills it. And I think he can.
Speaking of themes, kind of a theme in the NFC South, well, not just the NFC South, but since we're talking about the NFC South, in terms of their drafts, a lot of defensive backs and wide receivers selected in the draft this year. And it was obviously a big draft for those two positions, but kind of where we are in the NFL these days, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, easily. I was shocked Atlanta didn't take a tight end or a wide receiver at some point. When Marcus Sproul and Smallwood, I didn't see the need for as many linebackers as what they took, but I can understand why they did it. Because that was the big issue on the defense last year, was a lack of linebacker depth.
In hindsight, it's kind of a good thing, you know, with Weatherspoon going down again.
I hate to say it this way, but I think Bartu might be a better fit for Mike Nolan's defense than Weatherspoon is.
Okay.
He's better at shedding blocks. He's a lot more physical. He attacks better. He's a better blitzer, and he's way better in coverage than Weatherspoon is. Weatherspoon's very overrated in coverage. He gets by on reputation there, but he's really not great there. And I really like Weatherspoon, but he was misused. He probably in the new Falcons defense, he should have been playing outside where they're playing Corey Bierman, honestly.
Interesting. Okay. So the next pick was another linebacker, and where do you see Marcus Sproul? Is that how you pronounce it, Sproul?
Sproul.
Yeah.
Marcus Sproul.
Where do you see?
He's going to stick at weak inside linebacker. He's a solid tackler. He's a quick player, but he's very raw to the position. I see him more like the way, how do I put this? He reminds me of Robert James for the Falcons. Played probably 4 years for the Falcons doing nothing but special teams. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think long term he's a special teams ace, and then in case of emergency, break the glass linebacker. But gunner, key, core, special team guy. I think the guy with more potential at linebacker is Yawan Smallwood, the guy who was taken right after him.
Yeah, we were getting ready to get to him. Refresh my memory. Why no 6th-round draft pick?
They traded their 6th and their first. They had an extra 6th or an extra 7th-round pick. They had 3 7th-round picks and a 6th-round pick. They traded those 2 picks for Marcus Sproul.
Okay.
So the whole losing an extra pick to go and get Marcus Sproul kind of makes me go, they traded up for a special teamer. But if he ends up looking better than what I saw, then I'm not going to worry about it.
I don't know the draft value there, but it's almost like a late 3rd, early 4th.
Not really. The draft value of a 6th and a 7th is a mid to late 5th, and they got him in the late 5th. So
okay.
I'm not as worried about that. When it comes to Yawan Smallwood, though, I just pretend that those 2 picks were flipped, and it makes much more sense because Smallwood is a better, more instinctual player, and I think he's going to end up being he may not start right away, but I think long-term he might end up being a starter. Worst case scenario, I see him as a Keem Dent, as you know, the backup, the core special teams guy who ends up 10 years down the road being, the Ike Reese of the team, basically.
You alluded to this. I was really shocked that Smallwood was there. Were you as well?
Oh, yeah, I wasn't expecting him to be there at all. That was by far the least likely pick that I saw. And he just magically was there, and I had a 3rd-round grade on him, if not higher.
Yeah, a lot of people really, really liked him.
Yeah, I mean, he was. When he came out, I thought, man, this guy could end up in the 1st round. But very, very good player.
Why do you think he fell?
I think he fell because he decided to run in his pro day, and he got a 5.1 in the 40 because he looks slow, and he's really not that slow. When I saw him out there at minicamp, he looked all healed up, and he looked fast compared to the other guys. So I think he's probably really more of like a 4.7 guy who was injured. So
all right.
Don't run if you're injured.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in hindsight, might have cost him a lot of money. But, if he does well, that 2nd contract, might make up a little bit for it. All right, let's talk about one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Sunshine, Mr. Sunshine himself, the guy with the best hair and the best name, Tyler Starr, another linebacker from South Dakota.
Yes, Tyler Starr. I wrote a long article about him. I think he's a great fit for Mike Nolan's defense, but he is a project. He has no technique right now. I think the Falcons keep him on the roster this year.
I was going to ask you if he was headed for the practice squad.
No, I don't think they do that. I think they keep him on the roster. They did this with Vance Walker. They kept him on the roster the first year, didn't really play him much. 2010 gave him about 200 snaps. 2011 gave him about 400 snaps. 2013 or 2012 made him a starter, essentially, because they were playing a lot of 3 defensive tackle sets. I think that's the kind of, and they did it with Corey Bierman too. Bierman saw a lot of, he was on the roster the entire first year, but saw maybe 100 snaps on defense. It was primarily a special teams guy. If he was even active, it looked like a wasted pick. So some guys, they don't start out right away and look very good. Some guys,
some guys take time. Yep. Absolutely. Hey, before we get to your other, I want to talk about, I'm going to tweet this out when we get through with the show. I want to talk about your other undrafted free agents, but before we get there, I want to ask you, draft grades are worthless. We all know this, but they're fun. So I want to ask you to grade the Falcons draft and then give us your favorite pick of the draft.
If I had to grade the entire thing, I'd say it's probably a B+. Filled a lot of needs, addressed the line, built a lot of depth in the defense where it was needed, but got really, really, really young on defense really quickly. And that's not really a bad thing. I don't really mind that much. But it's still...
Sometimes you got to do that.
Still something you see. The best pick, to me, was easily Jake Matthews, but if I had to pick more of a sleeper, I'd go with Starr. The worst pick for me was Marcus Sproul, or Desmond Southworth, because I didn't think Southworth was really worth that high of a pick, but I could see why someone would like him.
All right. Fair enough. Okay, so you mentioned that the Falcons didn't select a tight end. They didn't select any wide receivers. You had a few wide receivers, and as I recall, at least one tight end on your undrafted free agent list to watch. Give us a quick preview of those guys.
I think I had Geraldo Boldeman, who has basically said he's Brian Finner in Part 2. I had...
I've got it pulled up. I'll tell you who it is. You had Geraldo, yep, and then you have Bernard Reedy on there.
Bernard Reedy is a kind of a slot guy. He's basically Harry Douglas, but with better deep speed. Freddie Martino from North Greenville.
Yep.
That's the name that people need to watch out for. He's a very similar to Roddy White kind of receiver. He could be that surprise that somehow is killing it in camp and magically looks great, and all of a sudden winds up on the roster, and then people go, wait, who is this guy?
Jacob Peterson, your tight end from Wisconsin, on the list. I was a little surprised he didn't get drafted.
I was a little surprised there too, just because he's a really good H-back, but it made sense. You're not gonna.
It was a pretty deep draft. You can't draft everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can't draft everybody, but
good player, I think.
I want to say I had like 4 or 5 guys rated after him go ahead of him. But, I mean, I had a bunch of guys rated ahead of him, too. I had probably 6 guys rated ahead of him. But I had like 4 or 5 guys rated behind him still go. That's why it was a deep draft, but it was a weird draft for tight ends. There was nobody.
It really was.
There was nobody really worth drafting super late, because you see the difference between there's like 7 guys went in the top 100 picks, and then 3 went the last 156.
Is Martino the guy that you think has the best shot to make it of that group?
No, I think Martino ends up on the practice squad for a year. I think he's the Miles Austin, the Victor Cruz, that kind of guy of the group. I don't think he's a starter. I don't think he even makes the roster right away. I think people kind of give him an afterthought because he's going to look so raw. He might be productive in preseason, but he's going to look really raw to a lot of teams. And he's not a good special teamer, so they're not going to.
No, that's not good. Yeah, you got to make that back end. You definitely have to have some special team skills, or be a guy that they're just absolutely afraid that they're going to lose if they don't roster him. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about how you feel the Falcons stacked up in the division, and I'll let you just go ahead and give us a list, rank them top to bottom. The guy in the NFC South, the teams that did the best, starting with the top and then going down to the bottom.
I'm going to look like a homer because I think Atlanta improved the most this year. And then I think Tampa Bay. Then I'd say New Orleans, and then I'd say good old
Carolina. Sweet Caroline. Yeah, I mean, I've gone around and around about this. I liked the Falcons draft. They were one of my draft winners. I liked the Saints draft. I wasn't. I know everybody is infatuated with Brandon Cooks. I understand why. I thought that their second-round draft pick, he was my favorite pick, the defensive back that they picked, a big, strong, physical guy. I really, really, really liked what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did. I thought that their free agency and their offseason and the free agency and their draft complemented each other very well, and I'm kind of excited to see how they do. An interesting stat that I ran across today, Scott, since 2002, and shout out to ESPN for this, since 2002, when the division was created, no team has repeated as the NFC South champ.
And I don't think that happens this year because I think Carolina takes a huge step back.
I completely agree.
Based on what happened with their offensive line, because their offensive line looks sorry right now.
Yeah, they're gonna miss. They're gonna miss Jordan, and I think they'll miss Steve Smith a lot more than they thought that they might. I snagged Kelvin Benjamin in a rookie in a dynasty draft because I think that he's going to get a lot of looks and a lot of playing time. But if you had to pick the division right now, you feel free to be a homer. I don't mind. We're homers around here. Who would you say is going to take the division this year?
I think if Atlanta's offensive line gels, they're the winner. If it's not them, I think it's the Saints. I think Tampa Bay comes in third, 7-9 to 9-7. I think New Orleans is going to be anywhere from 10-6 to 12-4. I think Atlanta is going to be anywhere from 10-6 to 12-4. Again, the difference between their records is going to be the head-to-head games. If Atlanta sweeps the Saints, they'll go 12-4. If Atlanta loses both games to the Saints will go 12-4.
Yeah, it's a really, really tough division right there. I'm excited to watch it this year. Won't be long. We're roughly about a month away from training camp. So we'll be doing some training camp shows. We'll have a lot better idea of what the rosters are going to look like, what teams are going to look like. Let's talk a little bit about the NFC. We've got some time, thank goodness. Let's talk about the NFC in general. Who were your winners and losers, just draft-wise, in the NFC?
See, that's so tough because the NFC, for the most part, did pretty well.
I'll tell you who I really liked what the Chicago Bears did. I liked what the Falcons. Well, yes, I liked what the Falcons did. We've talked about the NFC South teams, so I'm going to focus on the teams that aren't in the NFC South. The Packers were one of my winners, and the Vikings.
I didn't think the Panthers had a great draft. I didn't think that
You didn't like the Packers draft?
No, the Panthers. Wasn't a Panthers draft fan.
Yeah.
I loved what the Cowboys did.
Yeah. They had a nice draft.
They had a very good fit for them draft. I like what Detroit did. It was out of the box. People were like, well, what are they doing? But every pick made sense for them.
I thought that they overdrafted Eric Ebron. I thought that was...
I had a top 5 there in there, Ebron.
I thought that they could have gotten better value there. I know people love him. I can't wait to see how that works out. And I think that he's a great player. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a great player. Let's see what kind of impact he has.
The Vikings, out of anybody in the NFC, though, had the best draft by far.
Yeah.
They had Anthony Barr in the start. He's going to end up playing probably 1,000 snaps for them at linebacker. Teddy Bridgewater is going to play he's going to start at quarterback for them for sure. Scott Crichton is a defensive end that's going to rotate in starting out and then eventually start for them. Jerick McKinnon's that X Factor, Darren Sproles, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kick returner. Like, just get him on the field. He's going to do something. David Yankee will start for them at guard between Matt Khalil and John Sullivan this year probably. Antone Exum has potential to be a starting free safety next to Harrison Smith and look really good doing it. Kendall James is a solid nickel. Shamar Stephen was one of the nose tackles that I really liked. Brandon Watts is raw but has a ton of potential and is one of the strongest players in the draft. Georgia Tech product saw a lot of him this year, and I had a draftable grade on him. He's smart, but he just moved to defense a couple of years back. You know,
Well, kind of like Anthony Barr.
very much like Anthony Barr, but he's a 6'6" or 6'2", 245-pound guy. Runs a 4.41, runs a 6.89 in the cone, has a 37-inch vertical jump. Like if you saw his pro day, you'd be like, why wasn't this guy even invited to the combine? Very good outside linebacker, can play safety a little bit. Would love to see him slide in as that Wolverine style kind of guy. And then Jabari Price was just kind of a throwaway pick, but when you've got as many picks as what the Vikings had, it was no big deal to throw away a pick or two here, you know?
I completely agree with you. I loved the Vikings draft. What they did in the last two drafts, I've absolutely loved. A lot of buzz about my guy, Cordarrelle Patterson, another guy that I just snagged in my Dynasty draft. We're here. I think that, excuse me, the Vikings they finally got the right coach. They've got the right coaching staff. They're going to use Cordarrelle Patterson the way that he should have been used, at least easily by midseason last year. I think Viking fans have every reason to be excited. What did you think about what the Bears did? I really liked what the Bears did.
The Bears had a solid draft. It was solid. I like Kyle Fuller. Ego Ferguson is an underrated player who reminds me a lot of Corey Peters, and Will Sutton reminds me a lot of John Babineau. So when you put those two in the middle together, that says Tampa 2 right away. But the one draft that I didn't like at all was Seattle's.
Oh yeah, why not?
Not a single pick was worth where they took them. I had a 7th round grade on Marsh because of off-field issues. Paul Richardson just isn't good enough to be a mid-second. Justin Britt had no reason to be going in the 2nd round, but Pete Carroll's already shown he has no idea what he's doing when scouting offensive linemen. Kevin Norwood, I mean, I like Kevin Norwood, but 4th round on a 7th round guy. The only pick in their entire draft that I like is Kevin Pierre-Louis. But we're talking about a team that knows how to take linebackers and take athletic linebackers and turn them into Pro Bowlers easily.
Yeah. What about the Niners? How did you feel about the Niners?
Niners had a solid draft. I'm not a huge Jimmy
Kind of hard
Ward
not to when you've got like a gazillion draft picks, right?
Yeah, I mean, like Marcus Martin and Chris Borland and Brandon Thomas and Bruce Ellington. Like, I didn't like their 1st round pick, but every single pick after that, I'm just like, makes sense. Good pick. Solid pick. It's the 6th round. You can take who you like. Like, it's just picks like that the entire way down.
All right, the Cardinals. Give me your thoughts on the Cardinals. Another draft I thought was pretty good, and then we'll turn to the AFC.
I like the Cardinals draft. Kareem Martin's going to be the dark horse to be a dominant player from that draft. Has everything you want from the guy who's going to rotate with Calais Campbell. The only other pick, though, that made a lot of sense was Ed Stinson in the end, towards the end of the draft in the 5th round. Very underrated by a lot of people. Gave him a 3rd round grade based on his fit for a 3-4. If a 3-4 team takes him, he can be a long-term starter in that Brett Kiesel kind of mold.
Interesting. All right, winners, losers in the AFC.
Well, you might enjoy this, but that I didn't think Houston had a great draft despite getting Clowney, despite getting Suafilos, despite getting Knicks, because I feel like every pick outside of those three was just a reach and a bad fit.
I was not entirely sure what they were doing outside of some of those picks as well. What are your thoughts on the Tom Savage pick?
I didn't have a draftable grade on him. And I had over 400 players with draftable grades. So that should tell you everything you need to know about Tom Savage. He's just
Their quarterback situation is
he could start for
scary.
them. He
He
could
could
start
for them.
And he has no reason backupping in the NFL.
Yes.
And the Colts had a god-awful draft. Ulrich John is terrible. Shouldn't have been touched. The only pick that's good in the entire draft that they have is Dante Moncrief.
Yeah.
Love that pick.
Yeah, that saved their draft as far as I was concerned.
He's the only guy that's going to be there in probably 3 years. Now, Mewhort might be there if they move him to guard, but other than that, I did not like their draft at all.
Yeah, Grigson has really not had very good drafts. Now he seems to do okay in free agency.
Now, you may not like this. I think the Jaguars had the best draft in the entire AFC.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Not a huge Bortles fan, but I could see why a team would take him in the top 10.
Right.
I had a top 10 grade on him myself. When it comes to, like, hey, this guy's ready to be the franchise guy, start him right away, that's not Blake Bortles. That's Teddy Bridgewater. Bortles is the, oh, hey, sit him behind a guy for a year. So if they sit him behind Chad Henne for a year, basically tank a season, get a good star tight end for him, because I think Lee and Robinson are good receivers. I like Linder at guard. I like Colvin as a long-term number one corner. Let him heal up from the ACL. Telvin Smith is that athletic linebacker.
I love him.
You know, that I had a top 15 grade on him. Chris Smith,
Yeah.
I had a second-round grade on him. Have no idea who Luke Polanco was going into the draft, because I don't go past 10 or 11 centers when I do scouting, because it's pointless, because only like 5 or 6 get drafted. But I went back and watched him. Solid player. I don't see anything more than like his ceiling is Todd McClure, or who was the guy that played in Tennessee for years?
Which one, Kevin Mawai?
Yeah, like that would be his ceiling. It's Kevin Mawai.
Kevin Mawai is a Hall of Fame player.
I don't know about that.
He'll make the Hall of Fame.
He was a fringe Pro Bowler when he played.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's not a first ballot by any means. I think Kevin Mawai is going to make the Hall of Fame. I do. I definitely.
He was an 8-time All-Pro and an 8-time Pro Bowler because there was no one better. Like, he was good, but he wasn't like I don't know. I think Alex Mack is worlds better than Kevin Mawai. I think.
Do you think
worlds better than Kevin Mawai by far?
I love Kevin Mawai. Do you think that this was a panic pick? Given that there's
it was, hey, we like this guy, let's take him. Like that was all that pick was. And then Storm Johnson.
I love that pick.
It was, hey, this guy's still available? Man, just take him. We'll teach him how to not fumble. We'll smack him around a little bit and teach him, don't fumble. And if he fumbles, you cut him. 7th rounder.
The Jags were one of my winners in the AFC. They won the AFC South for me. They were one of my winners overall in the AFC. Robinson was one of my favorite wide receivers. I love Telvin Smith, Storm Johnson. I really like what the Jags are doing. I think that they're building. You didn't like what Seattle did in this draft, but there's no question but that they've built a quality roster from where Seattle was when Pete Carroll took over. Now you can say, you can say some of it's luck, or they've hit on some guys that that they got lucky with, or whatever. But hold on the Titans. We're going to talk about the Titans.
No, I'm saying the Jets had a good draft.
Yeah.
Calvin Pryor was a good fit. Amara was a good fit. I had McDougal as a first-round talent if he's healthy.
The Raiders actually had a good draft this year, Scott, don't you think?
Surprisingly, they got a franchise-caliber quarterback. They got the man at linebacker. They got the next Von Miller, basically. I love Gabe Jackson. I love Justin Ellis. Not a fan of Keith McGill, but I do like Travis Carey. And then their other two guys are just throwaway picks to me. And
What
then who
what
else
about
was
the
it? Miami
Broncos?
had.
Give us your
Oh,
thoughts real quick on the Broncos.
um, Broncos was all right. I like Roby. It's a good fit, but you kind of have a lateral move there. Cody Latimer as a developmental wide receiver was a perfect pick. He'll give you some beautiful catches this year. Schofield has depth at guard and tackle, good fit. Lemon Barrow might end up starting at middle linebacker for them this year, and they think he could be the Paul Warlow style impact this year. He could instantly give them 120 tackles, and people go, "Where'd this guy come from?" And you see other people going, "I had a second and third round grade on him. He's a good player. Like there's no reason for him to go in the fifth. He's a hell of an inside linebacker in the 4-3. No reason for him to go as late as he went." Matt Paradis, great center, but centers don't go high. And then Nelson was okay. And then
All right.
Miami had a good draft. I don't know what was in the water in Florida, but all three teams had drafts that fit needs, made sense, and the only pick I didn't like for Miami was Terrence Feedy. Because Juwan James, anytime you take a guy who's going to play 1,000 snaps in the first round for at least the next 10 years, that's a good pick. You know? You take a guy who's going to play every single snap you play on offense, one of 11 players, and that spot's filled with a guy who's going to be at least NFL average for the next 10 years. It's a good pick anytime you do that. Even if he plays right tackle his entire career, it's a good pick. Jarvis Landry was beautiful. Billy Turner is going to play left guard probably for the next 3 or 4 years. Then they're going to cut Brandon Albert and they're going to slide him over and find a guard. But
All
I
right.
thought they had a really good draft.
Okay. Give me your thoughts on the Titans real quick.
All right. Taylor Lewan should start right away at right tackle. The next year, move him to left. Let Michael Roos retire. Because Roos is probably, 34, 35 now?
No, he's 30, 31? 30,
31?
31.
I feel like he's
Yeah.
been playing forever.
He was drafted in 2004, as I recall.
Okay. So he's been playing over 10 years. I feel like once a
He's
lineman.
entering his 10th season. I do know that.
Okay. So once he gives you 10 years, you can cut him and be like, well, we gave you 10 years. If you still want to play, go somewhere else. Or be like, hey, you gave us 10 years and you're just not a
I
great
think
fit
he's
for us.
got 2 or 3 more years. I do.
I think worst case, though, you move Roos to the right side.
I
Lewin's a better
think
athlete. At this point in their careers,
I
Lewin's a
see
much
I
better
see
athlete.
Lawan more being the right tackle until Ruse is gone. Ruse is your quintessential left tackle. I don't see him.
I think a lot of teams are seeing what Dallas did with Tyron Smith and Doug Free, where they played Free at left and Smith at right, and then flipped them, and then let Free play out his contract on the right side and Smith play on the left, and seeing how it works, how the guy adjusts to the NFL the first year, switches positions, plays his position. Tyron Smith is arguably a top 3 or 4 left tackle in the NFL. Free is a solid right tackle. I think Tennessee saw that, and they're going to go, you know what, Lewin can play right this year, and then Roos can give us his last year at left. We'll flip him, or we'll cut Roos. But Roos is in the final year of his contract.
Do you think that they'll cut Michael Oher now? I mean, they signed Michael Oher in the offseason.
That's why I think they're going to let Roos walk. It's his last year of his contract, and then Michael Oher has signed 4 years. So that's just the thought there. And then the only other pick that I really liked for Tennessee was Bishop Sankey. There are some solid guys on the draft though. Daquan Jones can start at nose tackle eventually. Marqueston Huff's a solid reserve safety who can play special teams. Mettenberger, love his cannon, needs to mature off the field. But if he can mature off the field, he's a first-round quarterback. He's a talented quarterback. He just has to be mature and learn what he's doing.
What about Avery Williamson, the linebacker from Kentucky? Not big on him?
Depth. Took him in the 5th round. Don't expect much. Depth, special teams, backup inside linebacker early. Anything more than that, you got gold.
I like Avery Williamson. I'm kind of excited to see how he does. All right. Well, the hour always goes by fast. I want to thank Scott again for joining me and talking some Atlanta Falcons draft and the entire NFL draft. Scott, tell everybody again where they can find you.
You can find me at Scott Carasik. You can also read a lot of the stuff we do at Draft Falcons, or you can find all my work at Bleacher Report. I'd have over 800 articles there, and feel free to read any of them.
Yeah, very, very great information on the Falcons. I'm going to tweet out that undrafted free agent article. It's good stuff. Scott, thanks again. I am Sharona, by the way, your host of The Extra Point, hosted by, I almost forgot, the National Gridiron Network, www.nationalgridironnetwork.com. Be sure to jump on there and check out all the great articles and other shows that are being produced, and then read my last article about Bishop Sankey. Is it time to pump the brakes on the Bishop Sankey hype train? We'll be back next week with another great show. In the meantime, have a very excellent Friday evening.